Hello and welcome to Frank's School. I'm going on with trying to explain my water love, this relationship I've had. I'm 69 years old now, and for so much of my life I really think I've had a special interest in water, and I'm going on with it. Well, I had explained, sort of gone autobiographically, up to the point where I was about 28 years old or so, and I was on this farm. It had been abandoned, and I had the problem of attempting to tame it or make it usable or somehow profitable, uh, something that still goes on. But anyway, in the process of taming the ranch or the farm, and I'd said what I was not allowed to do. I said I eventually began to write the Meadow Book. Now, really, it's a journal, and I've recently reread it. What I want to do today is I'm going to show you, just give you a glimpse of some books, and then I think tomorrow, or maybe for a couple of days, we'll actually look inside the books a little bit. But I'll just show you some of these books that I got. Because as I said, I began to think about water as a teacher, and really I felt like I was onto something here that was worth recording. Anyway, the Meadow Book, here it is. This is a copy of the first of 10 copies, almost unreadable. I think I gave this possibly to my parents, and I recently reread it, and it's, as I say, it's almost unreadable. What I had done was I wrote it on Ditto Masters and made 10 copies, and I should maybe rekey it sometime, and I think I could read it all with an ultraviolet light. Some of it is so faded that I really couldn't read it, but it was of some interest to me. I started it, I was wrong in my dates. I came here in 1974, but I didn't start to write the Meadow Book until 1984. And then I wrote, mostly that year I wrote, and then I wrote a little bit more. I think the last entry was on my birthday in 1987. I think that's right. And it really is a journal of just what I was doing and how things were developing and stuff. I don't know if well, there's not too much point in my showing it to you because you couldn't read it. But I could tell you that in it, well, maybe I'll tell you more about that later. Anyway, irrigation. One of the things that I ran into was to find out that irrigation and drainage were related. They were basically the same issue. Yeah, I didn't write this down. I'm not as well prepared as I should have been. I had at a certain point gotten the Agricultural Engineer's Handbook, expensive book, but I think that was before I went off to Venezuela. Irrigation and Society in Medieval Valencia, that's in Spain. Irrigation in the World. I thought I'm going to get the answer. I'll get these books and I'll get the answer. Well, one of the things I did find out is that in the USA, there's a division. Here's the USA. There's one way of looking at water out west and another way in the east. This is, and riparian rights. It took me a while to become a riparian rights applies in eastern United States. Well, if you go to Europe, the division's more like this: Northern Europe and Southern Europe. And the reason for that is in Northern Europe there's plenty of water. The problem there is drainage more. In Southern Europe and coming out from Persia and Arabia, there's not enough water, and so the stronger impulse is to irrigate. And this area influenced the American West, California, Mexico, etc. And this part of Europe influenced the American East, which also has ample water. Well, that's one of the things that I ran into. Now another thing, I began to look into history. I should have written some more things on here. History, of what I was running into. Well, that took me to the Romans. I want to think it's Vitruvius, maybe the Roman author. They you could say wrote the book on irrigation, and also the Persians. that you know, this business clear over here that was taken, you know, you can take that back to the Arabs, but if you go further back yet, you come to the Persians. So I ran into that, and then let's see, I don't know if I have any, well, yeah, I do, Persian gardens and garden pavilions. My sister Lynn, my oldest sister, had bought that from you at one point. And then I say history, well, medieval gardens. You know, I was looking into them to find out. And then in terms of art, I mean, very often the words aren't there. Matter of fact, I have a whole issue of words not being adequate. And so often it's so much better to see what people actually did with their hands rather than hear what they've got to say with their words. Well, if you look into the books of hours, if you don't know about these, they're pretty wonderful. But anyway, they give you glimpses of what life was like, very detailed glimpses actually of what life was like in the Renaissance. And I would study them to see, look in the background, what's going on with the land. Bruegel is another one that I have studied his paintings to see what were they doing with their land and water. Now, I was recently in the Rijksmuseum about a year ago. I was in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and I'd gotten this little book to, you know, it took their art and pulled out details about land and water. That last one wasn't so good, but I began the process of looking into art and looking into history to relate to what I was doing. Water meadows. Well, that was a very big topic for me for quite a while. And I couldn't find the book where I think I first read about them. I think I loaned it to my neighbor. I can get it back. But here's a book. Back in the day before computers, there was something called books in print. If you were going to be a bookstore, you had to have a copy of books in print. Huge book. And I got myself a copy of it because a bookstore was getting a new one. And I remember going all through it under subjects and irrigation. And that was how I came across this book called Water and Grass. Now, it was a real find for me. And in it, I read about water meadows. Well, not only water meadows, pasture watering in general. The whole first. Well, we'll look inside these books a little bit later. I'm going faster now. My parents were puzzled with what I did, but still supportive. They traveled too a little bit, and when they were in England, my mother had gotten me this and brought it back. See page 19, it said, and page 19 there, it just looked like what I was doing, because I began the process of trying to establish a water meadow here. Probably ill-advised, but related to that series, wells and water supply capability. Brown, there's a landscape architect who made his reputation on his use of water. Medieval fields, and this peculiar book, Most Approved Waterworks by Roland Vaughan. This is sort of it's so peculiar now because it's a copy of a book that was written maybe 400 years ago. And he became famous in his day because of what he was doing with water meadows. The Venerable Vaughan, I think, was the nickname that he was given. All right, water meadows. What they are, in a word, is in parts of England and I suppose in Holland as well, they would completely flood their fields, cover them with water in the springtime, throughout the winter and in the springtime, and then drain it off. And that way the grass would grow more. You've got to have the right kind of soil to be able to do that. I've learned about that since, but there are parts of the farm that I could still do that, and I tried to do it, but the soil here isn't really right. But anyway, that was a very big subject for me, and a discovery, because I'd never heard of that in my education. And then bisses. Boy, that was huge. I ran across the word bis. And I rather think I first found it. Oh, I wish I'd. Well, I won't. We'll look in later. in this Michelin guide to travel to Switzerland, there was only about a paragraph about the bisses. And I'll probably show that to you later on. Well, bisses are, and they are, there's other names for it. They're these things that, like what I saw in Peru, where the water goes along this across the mountain instead of down a mountain, across the mountain. And that I became fascinated with. Eventually making 2 trips to Switzerland specifically to see the bisses. I eventually found them. There's a book in English, Bisses of Valais. Here's a book in French, Au Pays des Bis, in French Switzerland, in the land of the bisses. In the South Tyrol, they have them too. They're called Wale, and Waleweg is a book about the paths that go along the Wales. Again, back in Switzerland, here's a book, Wasser kostbares Nass, Water, a Costly Need. Now this is a locally produced book about bisses. It was given to me, actually, Osterberg. We'll look in these a little bit. And then for the longest time, I wanted to try to find this book. Now this was fiction. This is called An Heiligen Wassern, and I finally got myself a copy of it. It's been made into at least 2 movies too. It's fiction, but it's set in the area where bisses are so important. Well, that's just a glance at some of these books, and as I say, I think tomorrow, maybe I have to take 2 days with this, I'll flip through some pages of these books and show you a little bit more. But that way I'm still going. Bye for now.